We are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we are on Canto 1, Chapter 13. And the text for today is text 43. Chapter 13 is Dhritarashtra quits home. Prabhuji, I hand over to you. We can now see you. Text 43.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji, for the wonderful Mangala Charan. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining today, and seek your blessings that I may say something of benefit for today. And thank you very much to ISKCON Eldoret for the opportunity to try and share something. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Jeva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudiraye Nastaprayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Neshtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Kritika Mataji kindly mentioned that today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 13, entitled Dhritarashtra Quits Home, and we're reading text 43. Yata krido paskara karanam samyogo vigama viha ichaya kridusyatam tata vishek chaya narnam. Word for word. Yata,
Yatha,
as much as.
as much as.
Krida upaskaranam,
Krida upaskar na karanam,
playthings.
playthings.
Samyoga,
Samyoga,
union.
union.
Vigamo,
Vigamo,
disunion.
disunion.
Iha,
Iha,
in this world.
in this world.
Ichaya,
Ichaya,
by the will of.
by the will of.
Kriditu,
Kriditu,
just to play a part.
just to play a part.
Syatam,
Shyatam,
takes place.
takes place.
Tata,
Tatha,
so also.
so also.
Eva,
Eva,
certainly.
certainly.
Isha,
Isha,
the Supreme Lord.
the Supreme Lord.
Ichaya,
Ichaya,
by the will of.
by the will of.
Nirnam,
Nirnam,
of the human beings.
of the human beings.
Translation. As a player sets up and disperses his playthings according to his own sweet will, so the supreme will of the Lord brings men together and separates them. Purport. Mataji, could you read the purport?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much.
Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.
Jai.
We must know for certain that the particular position in which we are now set up is an arrangement of the Supreme Will in terms of our own acts in the past. The Supreme Lord is present as the localized Paramatma in the heart of living being, as it is said in Bhagavad Gita 13.23. And therefore, he knows everything of our activities in every stage of our lives. He rewards the reactions of our actions by placing us in some particular place. A rich man gets his son born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but the child who came as the rich man's son deserves such a place, and therefore he is placed there by the will of the Lord. And At a particular moment, when the child has to be removed from that place, he is also carried by the will of the Supreme, even if the child or the father does wish to be separated from the happy relation. The same thing happens in the case of a poor man. Neither rich man nor poor man has any control over such meetings or separations of living beings. The example of a player and his playthings should not be misunderstood. One may argue that since the Lord is bound to award the reactionary results of our own actions, the example of a player cannot be applied. But it is not so. We must always remember that the Lord is the supreme will, and he is not bound by any law. Generally, the law of karma is that one is awarded the result of one's own actions. But in special cases, by the will of the Lord, such resultant actions are changed also. But this change can be affected by the will of the Lord only and no other. Therefore, the example of a player cited in this verse is quite appropriate, for the supreme will is absolutely free to do whatever he likes. And because he is all perfect, there is no mistake in any of his actions or reactions. These changes of the resultant actions are especially rendered by the Lord when a pure devotee is involved. It is assured in the Bhagavad Gita 9.30 to 31 that the Lord saves a pure devotee who has surrendered unto him without reservation from all sorts of reactions of sins. And there is no doubt about this. There are hundreds of examples of reactions changed by the Lord in the history of the world. If the Lord is able to change the reaction of one's past deeds, then certainly he is not himself bound by any action or reaction of his own deeds. He is perfect and transcendental to all laws. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Beshta Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirishesha Shanyawari Pashchatta Deshatarine. So Hare Krishna everyone, thank you so much for joining today for today's discussion on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Once again, just want to thank you so much for joining here today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts on this wonderful section of the Bhagavatam, and seeking your blessings that I may say something that may be of benefit to everyone, and also for my own purification. So, just a quick recap of apologies if my camera is a bit off. My laptop camera has stopped working, so I've got a webcam and I'm trying to make it work. But just to repeat the verse again, as a player sets up and disperses his playthings according to his own sweet will, so the supreme will of the Lord brings men together and separates them. So just to give some context, if you haven't been listening so far, we're on the chapter Dhritarashtra Quits Home, and we've been discussing earlier in this wonderful chapter how Mahatma Vidur has come to save his brother Dhritarashtra and convince him to aim for liberation now, rather than be overcome by a lamentation for the loss of his sons, the Kauravas. And instead of wallowing in self-pity, he advises him to take to the spiritual path, to leave the place, and to set forth for the Himalayas. After the demise of the Kauravas, Dhritarashtra is under the care of the Pandavas, and leader of the Pandavas is, of course, Yudhishthira Maharaj. And so Dhritarashtra is left without informing anyone, which is actually advised at his stage, and advised by Mahatma Vidu. And this is so that people don't try and convince him to stay, and to kind of help in terms of detaching and advancing on the spiritual path towards liberation. But then, so obviously, Yudhishthira Maharaj has noticed that Dhritarashtra cannot be found anywhere, and so he then is questioning, where is Dhritarashtra? And at this point, the amazing devotee who comes at many junctures in the Srimad Bhagavatam, a pure devotee, is Devarshi Narad Muni, who then addresses Yudhishthira Maharaj, and he says some very prominent things to him. And one such thing he's saying is, as a player sets up and disperses his playthings according to his own sweet will, so the supreme will of the Lord brings men together and separates them. So upon reading this verse, I was thinking, how can I, what can I speak on this verse? And I tried to listen to a few classes by senior devotees on this verse, and I was really trying getting into the kind of purport, and it's a very kind of esoteric, deep verse, and when I was younger, I used to like to play chess. So I don't know if we've got any chess players here listening, but it can be so like this, as a player kind of decides where the pieces go, in the same way the Lord by his supreme will brings men together and separates them. But I was thinking, okay, what does this mean to me? And for me, and getting into there's a friend of mine who now lives in the Midlands, and he was a brahmachari for some time. He's a brilliant speaker. And once he was giving a class on the Chaitanya Charitamrita during COVID, and he advised during that class that to really understand and go deeper into the Bhagavatam, his Guru Maharaj advised that we try and get into the feelings. What do you think the people in the Bhagavatam, what they're experiencing, what emotions they're experiencing at that time? And so I was thinking, what emotions is Yudhishthira Maharaj feeling at this time, knowing that because of him, his uncle is lamenting, and he was supposed to be, he's still his uncle, even though despite all the wrong things that Dhritarashtra has done, and now he's left. And I was thinking, Dhritarashtra, he must be feeling, Yudhishthira Maharaj will be feeling an incredible amount of guilt. And also, this chapter and this verse in particular, for me, what was coming up was the theme of loss of relationships. So, with that being said, that I just wrote something down, which was the theme for today's discussion, which is losing to gain. And what we've given a bit of a background, an introduction to where we are in the Bhagavatam, and just a few things I wanted to kind of cover and maybe discuss with you all, and I'd love to hear your thoughts also, is the reality of material relationships, and then dealing with, first of all, like the kind of losses we experience within life, and the losses devotees have experienced in life, and then finally just to kind of explore, okay, what does it mean losing to gain? Like, what can we gain from loss and all these losses of relationships, and what does that even mean? So to kind of open in the Bhagavad Gita, in the kind of 8th chapter, the 8th chapter, text 15, Krishna is saying, Mamupetya punarjanma dukhalayam ashashvatam. So he's saying that this material world is full of misery, place of miseries, dukkhalayam, and ashashvatam is temporary. So it's a horrible place, this place. Let's be under no illusion that the place where we're residing, the material world, is not a nice place. And in the very next verse, he says, Abrahma bhuvana loka punaravadinojana mamutayata kontaya punajanmana vidyate. Of all the places in the material world, from the highest Brahmaloka to the lowest Pitraloka, all the places of misery wherein repeated birth and death takes place. But those who attain my abode never return to this place. So yeah, so he's saying, Krishna is saying basically that this material world is such a horrible place, you know, and sometimes we think, you know, maybe if just I have, you know, I'm well situated in with my family, you know, I have a nice husband or a nice wife, and or if my partner behaves in a certain way and acts in its you know, the way I would like, and then my children behave in the way I would like, and I have a certain amount of friendship group, and or maybe a certain amount of family members and a certain material situation. Maybe I just you know, I don't want too much, not like a 10-bedroom house, just like maybe like a 6-bedroom, 5-bedroom house, you know, a couple of cars, and then, you know, everything will be perfect. Then you know, then I can really go for it in Krishna consciousness. But this, you know, the reality of material relationships is that we're constantly experiencing loss, just as Yudhishthira Maharaj here is experiencing a lot of guilt and loss of his dear uncle and many relatives, in fact, that are dear to him. Now, the reality of material relationships is that even ones who are close to us can be ones that can hurt us and can do horrible things. Even though they're supposed to be people we think could support us. Can anyone who's on the call, can anyone think of any examples where I suppose it's you know, someone who is close to a person, or you know, being a protector or a family member, actually turned out to be a cause of grief for that particular person?
Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad Maharaj.
Wonderful example, Madzi. Yes, so Prahlad Maharaj, a father is supposed to protect a son, especially a child, and instead Hiranyakashipu was torturing his own son. Can anyone think of any other examples? Okay, so there's quite a few examples actually littered throughout Shastra where the person who is actually supposed to be a protector and kind of supporter of a person, a devotee, turns out to be someone who causes them a great deal of pain. So another example that came to mind was in the Ramayana, was Keikei. So she actually initially had a good relationship, and she was quite dear to Lord Ramachandra, and the feelings were mutual. However, she ended up being a great cause of distress for Lord Ramachandra. And then we have later in the Bhagavatam, and I'll speak a little bit more about this pastime, is a pastime of Dhruva Maharaj, who again was rejected by his own father at a very young age, and again experienced a great deal of pain. Can you imagine, to give some context, just being a young boy, 5 years old, and to be rejected by one's own father, and then to be chastised and humiliated. He wasn't just chastised, he was humiliated by his own stepmother, and said that, you know, you don't have the right to sit on your father's lap, and only if you take birth in my womb, maybe you should pray to God, you should pray to the Supreme Lord. Then your next life, you take birth in my womb, and then maybe you'll have the right to sit on your father's lap. But until then, you cannot. And he was humiliated in front of so many people, and felt a great deal of pain, and ran crying to his mother for advice also. So there's many instances where someone close to a person actually caused them a great deal of distress. And perhaps we can even sometimes feel this in our life, that some people who we deem close, whether it's family members, whether it's friends, can cause us a great deal of pain. Just want to explore this concept of loss in life. So it's a very painful and difficult kind of topic, and I don't really feel fully qualified to speak, but I'll talk a little bit about my own experience and my own understanding. So I remember even when coming to Krishna consciousness, um, I by this point I'd given up, a lot of vices. I'd become a little bit more pious. I'd given up kind of meat eating, drinking, gambling, etc. And I started, attending courses. But I started in Krishna consciousness at a relatively advanced stage. For me, I always say to people, life begins at 30, because that's when I actually started seriously anyway, practicing Krishna consciousness. And I'd come to the temple, and initially I was, very enthused. I was attending many courses, but at the same time, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know any devotees. I was really too old to engage in with the youth group Pandavasena, because I was at least 10 years older than most of the people in there. And so at the same time, I was feeling quite alone. And also, um, as I was taking to Krishna consciousness, you can imagine that I lost a lot of friends. So a lot of the people I used to call friends, um, I couldn't, they were spending their time in pubs and bars and, restaurants and things. And I had no interest for those things anymore. And I realized that wasn't conducive to my practice of Krishna consciousness. So these relationships all began to fade away. And at the same time, that can be a very kind of painful experience, because some of these friends I'd be friends with for, like over a decade. At the same time, I became kind of disconnected even from family members, and I didn't enjoy the same things that I used to enjoy, and so I was experiencing a lot of losses, whether it was in friendships, within family, and so yeah, it was a lonely place initially in Krishna consciousness, but then I started taking one step. I did was I started to take advice from senior devotees, and I expressed my heart to one devotee in particular, who was actually his service was, at the time, he was distributing books in the reception of the manor, and I was telling him that I feel quite alone. I don't really know anyone here. I don't really know any devotees, and I'm coming to my courses and leaving, and I take darshan, etc. And this is actually what I did, though I didn't realize at the time, was I was actually doing the right thing. There's a wonderful book called The Nectar of Instruction, which is a summary of a book by Rupa Goswami. And within that book, there's a wonderful verse, Dadati Pritagrinati, Guyamakchati Prichati, Bhukte Bhajati Sheva, Shadvidam Prati Lakshanam. So in there, Rupa Goswami is talking about the 6 loving exchanges between the devotee, and in particular, the one I want to focus on, especially when we're experiencing this kind of loss of relationships, we're feeling alone, we're feeling lonely. And what I did there was Guyam Akchati Prichati, which literally means inquiring in confidence. So, it's described, Srila Prabhupada says that a devotee will approach a more senior person, and they'll reveal their mind in confidence. And like I did to this devotee, I expressed my feelings to him. I said, I'm feeling quite lonely. I don't know anyone. And his advice to me at that time was, at that time, it was coming up to Janmashtami. And he said, there's so many things, so many services going along. Why don't you just come and help out? I said, I have work. Is it okay if I just come after work? He said, yeah, just come in the evening after work, and that's where you can help. So I thought, okay, I'll do that then. So I I turned up to the manor one day after work. I was still wearing my suit and my shirt and everything. And I asked, where can I help? And they got me moving some boxes. And I think we moved like several hundred kilos of flour from one place to another in preparation for Janmashtami. And at that time, I started talking to the people who I was serving with. And it so happened at that time that the group of guys who I was serving with, they're all around my age. They're all male. And interestingly enough, they all had an interest in boxing. And I've talked about before how I used to be a boxer. And I just thought, what is the chances of this, And then, I explained to them I was quite new in Krishna consciousness. And this was like a whole kind of family group in one sense. And they'd been around for many time. A few of them were initiated. And then they invited me to a Sangha. And so like that, I actually became friends with all these devotees. I started attending a Sangha at their house every few weeks. And I got some really nice association from there. So that's one thing we can do. And I'll allude to this a bit later on as well, is when we experience loss in life, it's recommended that we go to someone senior and reveal our heart to them and tell them just how we're feeling, not just kind of bottle it in. I saw an advertisement once which said, "You were made or you were born to express, not repress." So, although like don't have a shastric reference for that, I definitely think in relation to this verse on the nectar of instruction, it's so important that we do express our feelings, And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the context of a wonderful devotee mentioned in the Bhagavatam. So yeah, so then I experienced this loss. I got this association, but then as I changed, even within Krishna consciousness, I changed, and the nature of this material world, as we said, adukkalayam, ashashratam, nothing stays the same. The only constant is change. So my circumstances changed. I started getting different interests within Krishna consciousness, and the friends I'd made, their circumstances changed, and then suddenly, I found myself a little bit alone again. And at the same time, I experienced many losses. I had a mentor in Krishna consciousness. Many of you will have heard of him, His Grace Janakinath Prabhu. And unfortunately, Janakinath Prabhu, a very, very advanced devotee, he left his body. And just when he was my mentor, actually, and I actually joined the ashram, he had to stop being my mentor because of his health condition. And then suddenly, within a short space of time, I actually, over the course of COVID and during that year and the year after, I lost 3 people who were actually only around the same age as me. So a dear friend of mine from university, he suddenly kind of contracted leukemia. Within a week, he developed septicemia and then left his body. And then, of course, there was His Grace Janakinath Prabhu again. He was almost exactly the same age as me. And then a few months later, I lost a cousin sister who was, again, only a few years older than me and had 2 young children as well. And so I was experiencing many, many kind of losses in life. And I remember at one point I went visited a yearly festival, a Kirtan festival in Belgium, a very famous temple called Radhadesh. And again, I went there with a group of devotees, but occasionally I'd find myself alone, and I was speaking to many devotees, and they said, one devotee in particular, I'll never forget what he said to me. He said that, like, this path, what you've taken, it can be a very lonely path. And there's times like that where even within Krishna consciousness, even in the association of devotees, our consciousness is constantly changing. We're constantly kind of getting closer and closer to the Lord. But as we get closer and closer to the Lord, and as we're changing, suddenly we find, I don't know if anyone can relate, that sometimes in life we feel that no one understands us. You just don't understand, these devotees, some devotees, they just don't understand me. And again, I was feeling like this, having lost all these people in my life as well. And sometimes we may think, okay, why? Why? Like, it's easy to say, Shastra is easy to quote. Dehinasmin yatadahe golmaram yovanam jarat tatadahantarat Easy to say, you know, that as a embodied soul continually passes from one body to the next, similarly, the soul passes into another body at birth, and a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. But then when you're feeling all these losses and you're feeling alone and like no one understands, what do we do? What do we do with all these feelings? Do we just bury our heads in Shastra? Do we bury our heads in chanting? What to do? So this is my final kind of concluding and wrapping up the theme of today, which is losing to gain. So I now like to refer to, as I alluded to earlier, the wonderful pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. So we'll explore this later as we get to the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But just to summarize, Dhruva Maharaj was the son of a great king. And however, the king had two wives, of which Dhruva Maharaj's mother was not the most favored queen. So Dhruva Maharaj's stepmother was the most favored queen. And there's one occasion where the king had one of his sons born to his favorite queen on his lap. And so Dhruva Maharaj wished to approach the king and be shown affection and sit on his lap, at which point, as I mentioned, he was humiliated and chastised in front of an audience at only 5 years of age by his stepmother. And she told him that he should pray to the Lord that he takes birth in her womb. At which point he ran so dejected and crying to his mother and asked her for advice, at which point she actually advised also that he should pray and take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Now, Dhruva Maharaj, being a young boy, he said, how can I do this? And his mother said, well, the only thing I know is that in that age especially, people who wish to really connect with the Lord would go to the forest. So at which point Dhruva Maharaj, he left for the forest and he left everything behind. And not knowing what to do, as many of us, we don't really know what to do in difficult circumstances. He tried to connect with the Lord in whatever way he knew how. And then by the mercy and by his sincerity of wanting to just connect with the Lord and get some assistance for the pain he was feeling, and how actually his initial goal was to understand how he could connect more with his father and then gain a kingdom even greater than his father's. Kind of like, you know, sometimes when we're hurt and we feel spiteful, we think, okay, I'll show you. I'll be in a situation even better than you are. I'll show you that I'm better situated without you. And this is how he was feeling. He was feeling very hurt. But because of his sincerity, he attracted the mercy of a great devotee, as we mentioned earlier, Narad Muni. So Narad Muni comes and he advises Dhruva Maharaj on a step-by-step process of how to attain the association of the Lord. And Dhruva Maharaj, through his sincerity, through his prayer, and through advancing through the spiritual stages and through the yogic process, he actually gets the darshan of the Lord. He becomes like a pure devotee of the Lord over a period of time, quite a short period of time, relatively, a period of over 6 months. He returns to his father as a realized soul, and he then eventually takes over the kingdom as his father retires, becomes a great king, and at the end of his life, after a great period of ruling, he returns on a transcendental plane. He is picked up by servants of the Lord and returns back home, back to Godhead. So what can we learn from this pastime? Well, first of all, Dhruva Maharaj, despite the pain that he was in, actually, we've talked about many devotees who were in pain, Prahlad Maharaj, Lord Ramachandra, and now Dhruva Maharaj. But they used that pain to drive them closer to the Lord. So they used that pain, and they didn't repress their pain. They expressed their lamentation. Think, even we look at Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita, in the very second chapter, right at the beginning of the Gita, Arjun says, Karpanya dosapata svabhava, pachamitam durma samuda chetaha, yatrayasha nishitan bruhitan me, shishaste ham shadi mam tam prapanam. He's saying, now I'm confused about what is my duty. And he's expressing that he's in a state of, he uses the term miserly weakness. And he's expressing his lamenting. And at this point, actually, he's even, Srila Prabhupada explains, he's crying at this point. He's crying to Krishna. He's in such distress. So he's expressing his emotions. In the same way also, Dhruva Maharaj is expressing his emotions to Narad Muni, saying that, I'm in such a painful state here. I don't know what to do. Please, advise me. And so what can we do when we're experiencing these painful moments of losing relationships, feeling confused, feeling people don't understand us, is that we don't repress, we express our feelings in confidence, but to someone who can give us some guidance. Now, a caveat here that we have to be very careful who, even within Krishna consciousness, who can give us guidance. So Dhruva Maharaj, he had Narad Muni, but Arjun, he had Krishna. But for us, it's a bit of a science. So we have to use our intelligence here and maybe test people out, test them a little bit. So express maybe not everything, but express a little bit of how we're feeling and understand ourselves, use some maturity that we've learned from our experiences. I remember early in my Krishna consciousness, I would just ask everyone and anyone for advice. And the problem with that is then you will get perhaps many different answers on which path to take. And we may, and I've been guilty of this as well, we may even hear cliches like, Krishna will only give you what you can handle, and the world is just temporary, and these kind of things that we hear in Krishna consciousness often. And while all of that is it's not wrong in one sense, as we've often discussed, that what might have been said is right, but it's not necessarily the right thing to say when someone is experiencing a great deal of pain in whatever situation, whether it's a loss of a relationship, physical loss of someone passing away. It could even be loss of health, could be loss of a job, could be a change in loss of circumstances, a loss of a service, many losses. But the pain that a person is experiencing can be, regardless of the circumstances, can be equally, there's not really a barometer of pain. We could say, oh, someone's got a really bad health condition, or someone's lost a family member, that pain is a 10. Someone else has lost their job, that pain is only about a 5. It's very personal and individual, and the level of pain that a person is feeling, we can't really fathom. So in terms of us, when we're feeling pain, as we test, we approach senior devotees, we approach our guru, and we test, we ask questions, we reveal in confidence, and we see what we receive. But in addition to that, we pray. So we pray, and we try and follow what is with faith, what we've been guided through the Shastra. And ultimately, as we do that, rather than turning to activities of the past, I mentioned earlier that when I was new in Krishna consciousness and I was feeling alone, I don't know if anyone can relate, but I felt like going back to those old friends of mine, because I thought, I can just give them a call and maybe it'll be okay, and I could go meet them in the pub, but I don't have to drink anything and these kind of things. But something inside of me, as I prayed and I read Shastra and I was engaging with devotees, something told me inside of me that revealing my heart to these old friends and meeting them in a pub where everyone is drinking is probably not a good idea. And again, as we go in Krishna consciousness, sometimes even people we used to associate with within Krishna consciousness now are not the right people for us. So we have to continue to pray. And interestingly, just how Krishna sent me the right people, if we keep turning to the Lord with faith, we'll realize that actually he will send us the right people. This is my personal experience. But if we keep going back, there's a saying that if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you'll get what you've always gotten. So we have to keep moving forward, keep turning to the Lord with faith, and sometimes we'll feel incredibly alone. But there's a few verses in the Bhagavad Gita which kind of really illustrates how we're never really alone. So in the 13th chapter, Krishna says, "Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the super soul." So Krishna is right there. He's right there in the heart. So when we're feeling these losses, then we can go inward, go look inward to the Lord, and look upward, and don't look back, because when we look back, like I said, we'll essentially trying to get something new from the things we've been doing and the people we've been associating previously. And finally, if we can reflect, and my wife encouraged me to do a wonderful exercise where recently I've experienced lots of loss of relationships, loss of old friends, and at times I've felt lonely myself, and sometimes we may question, did I do the right thing? And then we start writing down, okay, what is it that I've lost? And then what is it that I have gained by these losses? What is it that I've learned? And how have I grown as a person? And as I did this exercise for myself, I actually saw that the amount that I've gained as a person, personal realization, and personal benefits, connection with the Lord, was actually far outweighed what I'd lost. And so then we can start to see actually that Krishna is slowly removing these things from our lives to bring us closer to them. And then we actually gain more than we can ever have lost. And so to kind of conclude and summarize all this, what we've been speaking about is my limited understanding of loss, especially in the context of becoming Krishna conscious, is that to really become Krishna conscious means not really becoming something. One doesn't really become a devotee. It's really unbecoming everything that we're not. So we're losing everything and all these identities and all these anarthas that are not, because ultimately we're not the body, we are the Atma, which is Satchit Ananda. It's full of, it's eternal, it's full of bliss, it's full of knowledge. So we're all unbecoming, all these various designations that we have, we may be uncles, we may be brothers, we may be fathers, we may be sisters, we may be mothers. We have so many designations, cousins. We have certain identities in our job. We have certain identities in our family. We have certain identities in our community. But ultimately, we're unbecoming all of these things, and ultimately, we're not becoming anything. We're just unbecoming everything we're not. So we can realize that actually, what we really are is we're never alone, and we're always connected to Krishna, our Lord, and we'll always be his servant and always be his connected to him, and nothing can ever take that away. So as we lose all these things, as we explore the reality of our material relationships, as we go through the various losses in life, whether it's a loss of relationships, a loss of people in our lives, a loss of health, a loss of job, so many losses we're continually experiencing, if we can go through the process like Dhruva Maharaj, we can see actually, and we take shelter of the Lord during these difficult times. And as much as it's hard, we don't look back. We don't keep going back. We actually just look inward and look upward to the Lord. We'll actually see that we're losing these things, but we're gaining so much more. And so we can actually become more and more Krishna conscious, and just unbecome all that we are not. So those are a few thoughts on this amazing verse and section of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Please forgive me for any mistakes that I've made today, and I'd welcome at this point any comments, any corrections, or any questions. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you for this wonderful class. We already have a question. And Nikhil Prabhuji, kindly unmute and ask your question.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Kamal Prabhu. Yeah, as always, such a reflective, practical class. It's always so inspiring how genuine, honest you are. So thank you so much for just a few thoughts, not exactly a question, but one thing I was thinking, this point about the supreme will of Lord bring us together, separating us. And I'm sure there's always a similar verse where it says that we're just like twigs brought together in the stream, and they stay together for a little while, and then they kind of. So we read things like that, and it's like, it's kind of to teach us that it's temporary anyway. But it doesn't mean as devotees that, like you kind of expressed a lot, that it doesn't mean we won't feel. We're trying not to feel anything, and not express that. And like Prabhupada talks about this as well. Like even after Arjun's heard the Bhagavad Gita, then he loses his son Abhimanyu, and then he's lamenting so much. So Prabhupada talks about this, that ultimately it's natural. So even if you're a pure devotee on the level of Arjun, which I don't think any of us are. So then even if someone like that his lamenting that loss, then what to speak of us, so we shouldn't feel bad that I'm not like a proper devotee if I'm not like, I know the Shastra, I know the scriptural statements, so we shouldn't feel bad, like it's just natural, because that connection is always there. Like even on a spiritual platform, you have the connection with devotees, so it's natural you lamenting that loss, and it's a good thing, you're lamenting the loss of basically association of devotees, which is what we should be feeling, So I really felt that was a nice point that you kind of expressed, about just feeling it, feel what you're feeling. Kanchanajal Prabhu says that in our song as well, similar thing, that so you go through the feeling, you have to go through it to overcome it. So I thought that was really nice. Thanks for that. And then just one more thing I was thinking, kind of a slightly different angle to what your class was focused on, but just reading the verse, and just kind of being a plaything of Krishna, or being in Krishna's hands. Obviously, we all know Prabhupada's statement when he came to America, that oh Lord, I'm just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, make me dance, make me dance, make me dance as you like. So I'm sure we're all familiar with this. So it's really, it's a really powerful point that this is ultimately what we're trying to aim to be, to be that puppet in Krishna's hands, to dance for Krishna, or dance with Krishna. You could say it's a dance together, So I was also thinking of that when you said we're never alone, we're with Krishna. Because I read somewhere, I can't remember where, but Prabhupada was saying, he was talking about chanting Hare Krishna, and basically he's saying that we're never alone, because when we're chanting Hare Krishna, obviously Krishna himself is there, he's present. And he actually said in one lecture, he said chanting, but then he said we're dancing with Krishna. So I always remembered that he said that once, so then I was reflecting when I heard that when we're doing devotional service, and when we're chanting or associating with devotees, or whatever it might be, whatever service it is, it's a dance with Krishna, it's together with Krishna, it's a two-way thing. And And yeah, like you said, Krishna is always there, seated in the heart. But yeah, I also final thing, I also can relate to many things that you said, like coming to Krishna consciousness a bit older than some of my peers and feeling lonely at times, especially amongst, for me also, it was like coming to Pandav Center at the beginning, but I was kind of older than them as well. So I also felt that as well. And then, yeah, naturally, like you said, you change your association with Krishna consciousness as well. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. So many wonderful points. Just to so the verse, I was actually going to talk about that verse today, but I felt we were a bit short on time. The verse Nikhil Prabhu is referring to is in the 10th canto. It's chapter 5, verse 25, where Vasudev, I'm sure you know the pastime, he's he's gotten out of jail and he's reunited with Nanda Maharaj, and at the same time it's an occasion for celebration, but also it's he's also saying to Nanda Maharaj, he's saying, many plants and sticks unable to stay together are carried away by the force of a river's waves. Similarly, although we are intimately related with friends and family members, we are unable to stay together because of our varied past deeds and the waves of time. So yeah, a beautiful verse. And I was actually going to talk a little bit about Prabhupada, but I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Prabhupada's a pure devotee. And yet when he arrives in the Bowery, horrible place in New York, he's expressing wonderfully, if you read it, wonderful emotion. He's like crying out to Krishna, I don't know why you've sent me here. And you could imagine Prabhupada even like crying, as he's saying that. And yet, not long ago, a wonderful person who actually helped Prabhupada when he first arrived. So Sally Agarwal, I think she recently left her body. And so devotees were glorifying this great person. So he was helped by some people out of the blue. And you will never know, actually, if we just keep turning to Krishna, we'll never know what he will actually come into our lives if we keep turning, just keep looking forward to him. And something I didn't mention, but again, I like to mention kind of personal examples, is for a while, I was looking for a life partner. I think I was getting pressure from the age of like 24, quite young, from my mother and various family members, but it just never worked out for me. And then, I spent some time in the ashram, and at that time, I'd be running around doing my services, and there was a girl working in the Gurukul, which was at the manor at the time, and sometimes I'd run past her. But I saw her and I thought she looked very young, like far too young for me, so I didn't pay her much attention. And then I was at a program and I saw this girl again, and she was very quiet. I was speaking to someone else with her, and she didn't say a word to me. And I said Hari Bol, and she didn't say Hari Bol. She just kind of went and nodded at me. And I thought, okay, I'm quite outspoken, and and then a few years later, I became friends with this devotee, and he invited me to a program at his house. And so I went there for the Abhishek, and I sat down and I was focused on the deities. And then I was suggested this girl as a potential match. And I was taken aback. I thought, no, we're far too different. She's very quiet. I'm very outspoken. And but we're advised that we're actually quite compatible. And years later, she became my wife, Priyadarshini Devidasi, who's on the call today. And actually, someone showed us a picture of the Abhishek that I attended at her brother's house, and I was actually sat next to her. And there's someone had taken a picture, but I was so focused. We were both focused on the Abhishek. We didn't even really pay any. I didn't even remember being sat next to her. But what we both did is we listened to the advice of our seniors. We kept praying sincerely to the Lord. We knew that we wanted to advance in Krishna consciousness, and we wanted a partner to help us do that. And sometimes, if we keep looking back, and seeing what we've lost, then we won't see what's right in front of us, or in my case, what was sat right next to me. So, but by keeping looking forward, it opens our eyes to see what Krishna has in store for us. So this is just a nice reflection. And thank you so much for your amazing comments, Nikhil Prabhu.
Thank you very much. Yes, Priyadarshini Devidas ji, kindly unmute.
Hi Krishna, thanks for a really wonderful class. Related to a lot of that and took a lot away. One thing I wanted to, something I've been reflecting on is I attended a grief course by Prabhupada disciple Rambari Mataji, and I remember she recommended this book on grief, and it says in the book that we should incorporate our losses. So instead of sometimes when somebody the book's more about a primary loss, so like the death of somebody, but we see that a secondary loss, like you're explaining, like a loss of friendship or a loss of a job, are like secondary losses, but we feel the same emotion. So in the book it was saying that we need to learn how to incorporate the loss rather than forget about the loss. So if, for instance, it was somebody's birthday and I don't know, the person died or you don't talk to them anymore, and the example was given, like if it was your mom or your dad or whatever it is, then you could do like a celebration for them. You could like make a cake or do one of their favorite activities. So in that way, you're incorporating the loss rather than forgetting about the person. So I think in that way, our heart becomes softer rather than hard-hearted. So that was just like a reflection that I had to share.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that a wonderful point, and something I need to remember myself is that sometimes when we lose things, it's very painful and we don't want to go back there. But if we really can feel that we've overcome the loss, we can incorporate it and talk about people, talk about situations, talk about things, about what we've learned from them, what we've gained from those losses, and incorporate that into our lives. And I miss Janakinath Prabhu a great deal. Like I still miss him to this day. And there's so many things I wish I would like to discuss with him and things like that. But at the same time, I'll never forget everything that he taught me. And I often, sometimes watch a video of his which says "Never give up," and he's actually His Holiness Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj has written a short book about him too. And like that, so I'd like to think that everything that he taught me, I try and incorporate in my life instead. So I never really forget him, but instead I just try and honor him and honor, what his, honor the pain that I'm feeling within myself and the loss of a dear friend, but also incorporate that into my life rather than trying to suppress it. So yeah, thank you so much. That's a really great bit of advice, and I think I probably I would like to know the name of that book as well if you can remember it.
Sure, yeah, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. So, Prabhuji, just a last question. I know we have exhausted our time, but so this is loss of a friend or a relative or a person. But how do you deal with loss of material things, like there are people who have been ransacked and their whole houses? I mean, they've lost all their material things. I mean, it's difficult for them at that time to counsel them and say, okay, something good is going to come out of this. They've lost everything or some things. It's not necessarily a job that I'm talking of, it's material things I'm talking of. So how do you deal with that, and how do you incorporate those things?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maji. Very practical kind of a real situation is that we can lose something. And I would say, especially, I've been guilty of this, is that when a person has experienced a loss, such as that, it could be, something's gone wrong with their health, could be, the house has been ransacked. I knew someone whose house actually became flooded and they didn't have, the insurance didn't cover everything. So yeah, that was a horrible situation. And I've been guilty of trying to get the person to focus on the positive when in that moment, just imagine as I mentioned earlier, that regardless of the loss, whether it's something material or whether it's, you know, loss of a person, the pain barometer and the emotions they're feeling can be the same. You know, it doesn't, we may think, oh, for some people, if they lose material things, you know, they're not so bothered. For some people, it means a lot more to them, you know, and for different reasons. So in those instances, I think it's encouraging if we face that if we face that situation ourselves, it's important to follow the same process to express what we're really feeling in that moment, and be around people who can help us express that and just hear that. And if we're supporting someone who's going through that, just allow them to express how they're feeling, to listen to what they're going through, and not really minimize their experience, because it can bring up different things, like someone whose house gets robbed. I know one person, their house got broken into and they were fine. I knew another person whose house got broken into, and they felt traumatized by the experience. They didn't feel safe in their own home, so they're feeling a whole host of different emotions, and they felt violated. And so what I always say and what I try and implement when supporting people is we try and maximize their emotions. So we try and create a huge space for them to release everything and make it seem like, oh, that must have been really difficult, really awful. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Please, you know, how are you coping? You know, and really like with genuinely kind of empathize. I think, you know, that must be really difficult. Please tell me. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. Maximize it. And what that does is if we maximize it and create a huge space for them, that allows the person then to release all that tension or that emotion or the difficulties, because ultimately whatever happens externally, the biggest difficulty is our own mind. That's the most difficult thing to deal with in any situation, whether it's the death, whether it's a loss of anything. The most difficult thing is our own mind. So we're trying to assist people in doing that. We maximize them, so then the person themselves can come to the conclusion that actually this isn't the worst thing that has happened to me. You know, like there is something to be learned from this, but first they have to express, not repress. And once they've expressed, if they keep meeting people who keep telling them, you know, oh, you know, like something positive, or you know, Krishna, this is Krishna's mercy and that kind of thing. For me personally, that would make me feel worse, because I haven't expressed how I'm feeling. And you know, when Arjun had just lost Abhimanyu, and if Krishna was saying, this is just my mercy, you know, I don't think he would have, or when Dhruva Maharaj had been rebuked by his father and Narad Muni was said, this is just the Lord's mercy, you know, that wouldn't have helped. But instead, they were allowed to express, you know, all their emotions, everything that they're going through. And then once they've done that, they're able to take instruction and come to the conclusion themselves. And through, if you read the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj, what is initially after, he realizes he didn't even want that anyway. You know, he initially wanted to get back at people, but through the process of grieving, of letting go, of connecting with the Lord and going through the yogic process, he actually comes to the conclusion that what I'm grieving for isn't worth grieving over anyway. And that's the point that we want people to get to. But we can't do that for them. We can't bring them to that point. They can only bring themselves to that point. We can assist just by empathizing and creating this huge space for them to express everything that they're feeling. So those are a few thoughts on that, Mataji. I'm definitely not, you know, definitely not fully qualified to answer the question, and I've got it wrong many times, but this is what I've learned through experience and through reading.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. I think that will help. Are there any other questions or comments? I know we have exhausted our time, even for questions and comments. Can I request Prashnatma Dasa Prabhu, can you please end this session today? Is it possible for you?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Uh, Thank you, Kamal, Panchal, Prabhu, for the great class. And thank you for your advice. I wish that we may all try to imbibe and apply what we have learned, especially how to deal with loss, and how to deal with loss, especially of persons or material things. So thank you, Prabhu. I thank also all the devotees for giving their valuable time. Everyone who attends this Sangha, it's very important, and it really helps in our personal lives as well as learning the Shastra. So thank you a lot. And I request all the devotees, please unmute ourselves and chant the Hare Krishna mantra in glorification of His grace, Kamal, Panchal, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare
Hare
Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vancha kalpa tarubhascha, kripa sindhu bhayavacha, patitanam pavanebhyo, vaishnavebhyo, namo namaha.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada ki Jai.
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 Praise Kamal Panchal Prabhuji ki.
Jai.
Hare Ram.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.